Hi, and welcome to the PreSales Podcast. I'm your host and PreSales Collective General Manager, Chris Mabry. Today, I'm excited to chat with Dan Hellerman, technology enthusiast and co-founder of Saleo. We discussed the value of technical mastery. Daniel emphasizes the importance of pre-sales professions' deep understanding of their products they demonstrate. He argues that those who build the demo environments from the ground up have a distinct advantage. Hellerman's threefold example, showcasing the complexity and value of managing data in SaaS, underscores this point. A pre-sales professional's ability to effectively tell product stories can make a significant impact with this. Daniel sheds light on AI's role in optimizing demo environments. We discuss his interesting and intriguing successful background selling, designing apps. I hope you enjoyed as much as I have. Dan Hellerman, welcome to the PreSales Podcast.
Thank you so much for having me, Chris.
Yeah, of course. I've been following your journey for a while now, and obviously the Saleo experience. You guys have been making huge waves. I want to start this thing with a hot take. And it's because you have a technical background. The title of this is, Do Technical SEs Have the Upper Hand? So your opinion, you said this in the prep session, that SEs don't truly know their product unless they build the demo from the ground up. What's your take on this?
Yeah, absolutely. And this is one I'll take to my death. I'll defend this for the rest of my life. There is a big difference in SEs that I see directly involved with us day to day in Saleo and in the process of creating demo environments from scratch versus people that step in to sell. I define the term stepping in to sell, meaning maybe I've read my knowledge base from a good SE, and I'm hopeful that most do. As a product guy that writes a knowledge base, right? You're super hopeful that they read it. But there's a lot, bigger difference building data from the ground up. The example I'll give is sort of threefold. I always say SaaS is here to make complex data simple. So you imagine some of the most valuable companies in the world, the Salesforce, the HubSpots, are valuable because of the amount of data, right? The interconnected data that they report back up on.
Right.
But that data is detailed, right? In the case of a CRM, you have a prospect that reports as part of an account, as part of an opportunity, and all the activities that they do over time, right? These companies are valuable not because of what they host, but because of the data and the analytics they give you off of it. And so at Saleo, for us, without giving like a pitch, we're probably the only demo company that I know of that actually controls, like at almost the document database level, like a step above, all the APIs, all the data in an environment, so somebody's product can work. And so now what that means is that as people are trying to tell a story and they want to build a graph, they want to build a table, all SaaS is interconnected, right? You can drill down into records, you can do things. And so we give people the ability to create those individual data points if they want to like power a graph. So if you had a graph over time that said these deals, then you could build a graph that said we sold this deal at this time to this company that would help generate that data over time. And so what we've seen, sales engineers that build demos from the ground up are incredible. So to give you a quick story, SalesLoft's a customer of ours. They have a feature called coaching. Ryan Splain, who runs their SEs and is one of the best technical SEs I've ever met, he is hyper obsessed with learning everything about SalesLoft. And I think that a lot of the experience with Saleo has helped him get to be an even greater SE, right? He's one of these people that needs no help. He's just a golden god of SEs, to put it lightly. And there's not many people I'll say about it. So they have this coaching table. And this is another one of those SaaS makes complex data simple. So if you think about an SE stepping into selling this like coaching area, they have these incredible graphs that say, hey, by a quarter, here's the daily text messages, here's the daily emails, here's the daily phone calls, here's the daily activity of an individual rep, of a SDR team, and all the things that they do. And, here's the best times to call, and here's the worst times to email, and all this data. To think about it exponentially, it's incredibly complex. Like our demo that we use to power SalesLoft is almost like 1.5 million data points that we've used a mixture of homegrown data and AI to sort of, help them generate. But when you think about it, as a new SE, if I were to join SalesLoft tomorrow, and I'm not that Ryan Splain level, I go to sell you that coaching feature. I'm going to say, hey, look at this graph. It depicts this data over time. Your buyer experience is then, okay, here is a graph and it displays this data over time. But the value of that graph is something that's way easier to grasp when you're building that data from the ground up. Then the story to the buyer doesn't just become, here's a graph and this graph is valuable because it has this data, to look how much time we've saved you, look at how much work you'd have to do in a typical competing platform to build this data. Because now I'm saying to you, hey, look, every single email that your user sent is logged here in this chart. Think of how hard it would be for you to track this data by time. Every single call is logged in this chart. I can see them by positive, by the successes. I can tell as the day goes in further. And, Chris gets toward the end of the day, maybe he's half-assing his emails because his response rate goes down. And I can dive into this because now, instead of just creating a graph that goes up and to the right, you're forced to look at the underlying data in your platform and say, okay, what is a successful call? What's a non-successful call? How are we graphing that in a table? And all of a sudden, it goes from just being a set of lines that make your product look good for complex data to an entire story about how you can impact the buyer in their journey. And so I have 1,001 stories of that, but to me, that is the best way. Like if I had a team of new SEs, I would force them to do it. And one of the activities at Saleo that I make some of our new employees go through, especially the ones involved in whether it's implementation or sales engineering, is hey, go take this demo from empty, right? Some of the stuff that we built maybe for a sales law for another customer. I want you to start totally empty and go build a data set. Make sure you have at least 20 columns because then you understand the power of the data behind it, and it literally changes the way you tell stories about your product.
There's an interesting line there. When I first asked this question, I was thinking of highly technical skills. A lot of people in pre-sales that aren't technical, right? And this is where the term solution consulting came from. And this is where sometimes in SaaS, you don't have to be technical to be a really great SE. Focusing on soft skills, focusing on storytelling, on value selling. But I think what you're saying is true, that technical or not, you have to understand the why behind your product. And what happens if you don't have your product? How hard would it be for you to build this without it? That story and that data point is crucial for your prospect to understand the business value behind your tool.
Absolutely. And that's the thing that we see the most often, right, with Saleo, is companies that come to us, they say, hey, my demo environment is out of data. Because you imagine something like that call document, you can't keep calls and text message and things up to date and realistic on a day-to-day basis. You can't keep complex data up to date and be realistic and hope that this all works. And for you and I having histories as network engineers, especially if you're in the security or network security state, you can't keep your network actively being hacked day in and day out to show how your product, right? And if you think you're in cybersecurity, you don't want to demo people what their life's going to look like in the good times, because that's what they already see 99% of the time, right? You need to say, hey, when shit hits the fan and your network looks like this, here's how easy we make it to resolve. A lot of these products are sold in a situational idea, right? And you have to change the way that people demo. You have to say, we shouldn't be demoing it then in the way that life is always good. You should be demoing it in a way this is how we're going to make your life when things are difficult. But it's just not possible. And I think we're starting to see that change in the industry of hey, the art of the possible is becoming a lot more realistic.
Well, on that history, I'd love for the audience to know you a little bit better. So talk to us about your career journey, because you didn't start your career as a co-founder of an organization. Tell me a little bit about your story and your journey to especially a pre-sales focused tool.
So I've had the overall benefit of sort of Forrest Gumping myself through the innovation in history. I've got a long and storied history that I don't even put on LinkedIn. I've been a perennial entrepreneur. I've been hyper obsessed with startups for years. I had a startup in early college that did incredibly well. It was a mobile app startup called Cinefy. It let you drop special effects on any video you shoot. And so it was really cool. It let you, if you want to record a video of your kids, they could be chased by T-Rex. And this was before a lot of the modern apps. This was, oh my gosh, back when the iPhone, I think 4 was out. So very, very early in app development, before you had instant access to the things that you'd see, the AI TikTok filter, and things like that. And so we blew up overnight. I sent a couple emails to different news stations and said, you should check this out. I thought it would be I'd have to beg them to get an article. And instead, the next day, I got 15,000 articles across all the top tech blogs. And so
no way. You were in college when this happened?
Yeah, I was in early college, right? And so it was sort of crazy. I was overnight not expecting it. So I had an angel investor, somebody that I had met repairing their computer one day. Literally, I just chatted with them about the technology and all the things I was interested in. And he literally ended, I'm repairing his computer. I'm not working for Best Buy, but the equivalent of just at an office fixing a computer. He goes, if you ever want to build anything, I'll give you $100,000 for 50%. That's literally a sentence. And I was well, I have this idea. And he gave me the check the next day. It was the craziest experience. Fantastic guy. What ended up happening out of that is that we entered into this contest called the Consumer Electronics Show, which is the largest trade show in the world. They have something called the Mobile App Showdown, where they have every year. And so now it's October, November. CES is in January. And my first time ever demoing has to be on the main stage at CES of my own app. And I'm okay, it's a lot to take in as a 20-year-old, but you're processing, you're doing. And so we ended up ranking. We didn't rank top, but I think we ranked second for their mobile app showdown, and it got this like fury of interest into Cinefy and all these different features to where like I was like, okay, we're going to do Macworld next. Then I'm getting ready to go to Macworld. Like 3 weeks from then, I got an email directly from Apple's iPhone app team and their video app team. And this is back before like we were building a video editor that the timeline was side to side, almost like you'd see on a Premiere Pro. And they didn't have that in their iMovie. And they're like, we want to see how you guys are doing it, like, which was really kind of a cool thing. So my second big demo of my entire life was at Apple's headquarters, going into One Infinite Loop, going to meet with these teams that ran the iOS store and the video store for the mobile version of iMovie and showing them like my own single person developed iOS app and everything that you could have around a demo, right? Like I was experiencing things like, hey, this is still beta software. I wasn't ready for release yet. And so like, how do I make sure that this doesn't crash while I'm running it? How do I make sure I have good data for the demo? And oh my God, it's Apple. And how long is this going to take on their device? And, you know, it was really a crazy meeting to have as like a 20-year-old still at that point. Yeah. But that company went through the typical like mobile app startup. We had a good release and a slow pickup. Like it never really went anywhere super fast after that, but it was like my real introduction to demoing. My career took me from there to a company called Sev1. Right after I finished wrapping up that app, I was getting married and I found a job at a company called Sev1 as their like director of digital marketing. The head of marketing there at the time loved like what I had done with the mobile apps and stuff. And was like, can we bring some of that marketing towards network management? Because he's like, network management historically has really boring ads.
Oh, yeah.
Not like Apple.
Never looked good. Never been snappy.
Yeah, exactly. He's like, whatever you designed that built the eye of Apple and got it onto your app out of like the hundreds of thousands of apps on the App Store, like, can you bring that here to Sev1? And so my degree was actually in like network management and long distance networking. So it was like really interesting being one of the few people in marketing that would like could actually resell the product. And so I started getting to go to all the trade shows because I had designed the booth. And then I could also demo the software. And so I was able to have calls with prospects and like walk them through the software. I remember my first trade show ever, this prospect from Verizon Wireless, I still remember to this day, like came up and was like asking me a bunch of questions. I just started answering them. And then like, I was like, well, I'll just show you on the software. I'm showing him the software. And this one guy stops me and he's like, are you an SE? And I was like, no, like I'm just in marketing right now. You know, I had to sort of give them the history, but it changed the way that I was able to market at that company because I had the solutions engineering background. And so that was my first big understanding of the pre-sales problem because I saw what we were able to have at trade shows, right? Which was we were a network monitoring company that our benefit was scale, right? We could do multi-millions of records at once. And so we had like this patent on distributed computing that let us use something almost similar to the way BitTorrent works, which is a really crappy way of putting it, but basically like interconnected databases that could all pull each other. So like previously, if you wanted to pull all your network devices, it would take days to get that report back to see what's going wrong. And one could do it in seconds or minutes or hours because we had these dedicated polling devices that could all interconnect and only report on a certain bit of the network. So each one would report on their own. They combine all the reports and you could get it. And so we had big companies like Apple and Google and Verizon as customers. And so we did a weekly webinar. We got really into like, we have to show off our product. And so weekly, we had this event called Demo with Dave, which was run by this solutions engineer, Dave Hagen-Barth, who's another one of those genius solutions engineers. Like you meet a few in your life and you're like, man, I want to be like him. And every week I got to see Dave, I'll say tear out his hair metaphorically, but he would say like, oh my God, I have to build this demo and it's got to have this data. He's like the nicest guy, but he's like, we need to be able to show our network actively being hacked or some of these things this week. And how do I get that data? We run a data center and we'd like, not fake it, but you'd have to go adjust a computer to make it look like it was running hot or throttle its CPU. And then, so we built like all this concept. Like I did this cool little animated guy. We ended up getting like millions of views over time on these webinars that we did of Demo with Dave. And it was every single week I was animating, cutting, splicing his video to help them get marketing together. And so when I left there, I was starting to realize like, hey, you need to do a better job personalization in the marketing like area. Like, the idea of account-based marketing didn't exist. And so I started fundraising similar to what I'd done for the iPhone app to say like, hey, I want to build an account-based marketing tool. Personalization is going to be killer in marketing and sales. And we need to find a better way to do it. And so while I did it, I was like, I'm going to go try my competitor. So I did a trial with like an early days demand base and didn't like it, canceled after like 2 or 3 months. And I went and tried a solution called Terminus, which I used for like 2 or 3 weeks and canceled. And the CEO reached out, Eric Spett, and saying, Bradre and Eric Vass, who were the 3 co-founders, they sent me this email right after I canceled, they're like, well, that was fantastic. What were your thoughts? And I said, like, I called them and I also sent an email that said, like, basically, hey, I'm raising money to build a competitor of yours. I really like your software, but I just don't think you're doing targeting right at all. Can I come in and sort of change this? I said, like, your choice.
When you sent that, your intention was like very technical side, right? Like, I like what you're doing, but I know it needs to be better. But instead of building a competitor, what if we could team up on this?
Exactly. And it was like, I loved them. Like, they had tried to be helpful during my couple of weeks as a customer there. And I had like dumped a ton of data on them that was just like, here's how I do it differently. And so we had this relationship that wasn't aggressive. And I wasn't trying to be like threatening, like, oh, I'm going to go create this. I was just trying to be like, honesty was very important to me, to them, to be like, hey guys, like, you could really do this better. And so they had me fly down to Atlanta like a couple weeks later. And so I ended up joining as like one of the first batch of employees. I think it was like employee like 10 or 11, one of the first like non-founding executives, and spent 8 years building the company. And so, having come from Step One, which had raised 150 million, and we went from 150 to 600 employees, like it was like the same hot startup race again. And so Terminus became all about how do you personalize ad campaigns at scale. So it's sort of this idea that, of where Saleo was, we started giving product demos, right? It's how you sell your products, and seeing the same issues. Like, what the heck am I going to demo each week? Because we're an ads product. And so we couldn't necessarily show companies like our ads, because our ads advertised on our software are different than like the typical ABM that a normal company would do. We couldn't run a campaign because as a startup that only had raised $1 million, we were trying to sell to companies that had budgets of $100,000, and showing them success at a scale of like a couple hundred ad impressions a day didn't make sense. And so we struggled with that for a long time. We ended up showing, like, we had a project we called Terminus on Terminus, which is us using our own software, and here's how all our analytics did. But it didn't match, because when you're doing account-based marketing, like, people want to see what it's going to look for their experience using the software.
Yeah, that's a very common problem across the whole demo landscape. And as a lot of companies that I'm talking to are going up market, or they're trying to get into verticals and industry specific, the data is just wrong. I had somebody reach out to me recently and said, hey, I've got this really great podcast guest for you. And this is on the podcast. I get a lot of these marketing emails, and it was like they were like a professional chef. Okay. And it was like, this individual served at this restaurant and did this and cooked at this place and went to this culinary school. And I was like, it was almost like offensive. It was like,
where's the crossover? Yeah.
I mean, I don't really click on really any of them anyway, because I just feel like, especially in our niche in pre-sales, like, you got to have a very specific background to make sense. But it was so odd that, like, I wouldn't integrate or even just engage with this individual. And that's how it feels. If you've ever gotten a product demo and you're in tech, and say you're selling network gear, or you're at HubSpot, and somebody starts talking to you about the problems of a hospital, or the problems of legal stuff, you're done. You're checking your phone. You're like, how long is this thing going to last?
Yeah. And, one of the sentences I hear with a lot of our customers is that our product is a totally different product when you're using it for X industry. And it's true. Like, you could have a universal set of dashboards and graphs, but they are totally different when you're reporting for a hospital versus manufacturing versus aerospace.
And that whole like old school way of, hey, just imagine this doesn't say hospital data. Imagine it says something different. Which is what I've done most of my career. Boy, you've had such generic stuff in there that it doesn't land with a big prospect.
Well, now I need a Chris hot take, because I want to see if our opinions match. I frequently see names from The Office or Silicon Valley or like Pied Piper Records. Is it better to have a demo that doesn't match the industry at all, that is a realistic company, or is it better just to have fake names, Office, Pied Piper, Michael Scott type of records?
So I have no preparation for this, but my answer for this question would have been very different 3 years ago. I think at some point in time in my career, I would have really appreciated that, and actually worked at a company where we had a CRM for MSPs, and some of our engineers would demo with like the Office environment. Exactly.
Yeah.
I don't know. That's probably very common.
It's extremely common.
And I thought it was cool because it does allow you to generalize. It does allow you to make the conversation lighter. But fast forward, now that I'm in charge of revenue, now that I'm in charge of making decisions, now that I'm just increasingly busy, I don't really want to play around with any of that. I had become one of those people that's like, show me how to solve my problem extremely quickly and make it relevant to me. Or you can make it generic. I don't need it to be catchy. Like, I don't need it to be fluffy. I want it to be pretty straight to the point.
I couldn't agree with you more. I think it's a detriment to demo environments right now. I've seen the bad side of demo environments too, but to me, I immediately think if they can't demo something real, why? And it's like, is this not working? Does it not do what they say it does? And then second, as a buyer of software, I just immediately think, what am I looking at? Like I had a customer recently, I stopped them and I asked about the environment because I was like, I see a lot of Pied Piper, I see a lot of records. And he was like, oh yeah, like this is a Figma basically. And I was like, oh, like that's a red alert to me. He's like, oh, why? And I was like, because something tells me that like this feature you're telling me about isn't quite there. And he like, it was a decent salesperson. He didn't want to let on, but he was basically like, yeah, we haven't really released it. We don't have this yet. We're trying to like tell the whole story. And also like, we can't, PII, we can't show you this real data. And I was like, hey, if I were even just as a thing, I said, don't use the office records. Like people connect to that as being fake. We have a couple companies that I think are pretty brilliant. We have some companies that make things with like realistic looking companies, and they seed it, and it's the Google or it's the Microsoft or it's the Boeing or Lockheed type of view. And then we have other companies that like sort of quasi makeup companies, right? They're like, we're Veradigm Aerospace, right? And it's a name I just made up off the top of my head, but it's still realistic, right? You don't have a physical connection in your head to it being fantasy or being fake, and then you get to walk through that demo, right? And I just think it sets a way better tone than this is what Michael Scott would do. Because I'm also thinking like that guy's goofy, right? What's he going to do?
Yeah, that's the thing that I kind of lean into is like time is so valuable. And maybe this is just how buyers have changed, and I've changed as a buyer. And, in my personal experience, I've become a buyer, right? And I've become somebody who is really trying to lead an organization, and I don't need the goofy stuff. I don't know. It's, I guess, the hot take on that, but you're listening and your environment is the office. You're kind of thinking, I don't know. I don't want to offend anybody, but I just want to think like, take a step back and consider how your buyer has changed in the last 15 months, what their time is like, and whether that is really helping or hurting you.
I couldn't agree more. I had a prospect, without saying too much, that pulled in everybody from Silicon Valley, the HBO TV show, into their environment. That was their demo environment. And I was like, hey, when you click into their bios, just so you know, there's some like very NSFW stuff. They're like, oh, we just copied and pasted their Wikipedia. I'm like, hey, did you read it? And they're like, oh my God, thank you for letting us know, right? And this was in a sandbox environment. Yeah. Like they were sharing with people. They're like, oh, nobody ever dove that deep into it. If you don't know your data, right? You don't know what's in that environment. Like you're not a good SE. My prospect experience could have been ruined by some of the stuff that I had seen inside there that was just randomly dropped in as a copy and paste from Wikipedia or from a ChatGPT script.
What you're saying is spot on. Like you have to know your environment inside and out. Of course, there's always that old school way of like, don't click on it if you don't know what it's going to do. And then there's always that area in your demo environment that you click on and you just kind of like hope it works. You're like, yep. Oh, I don't know. Or you just don't click on this area. And I think we're beyond that. As a go-to-market function, which is the way I see pre-sales, we're beyond the time frame where you can have that sort of huge risk in your demo environments. There's no scalability to it. It doesn't have to be fully scalable right away. If you're like a startup, I get it. You have to do things that aren't scalable within the first few months, right? But like, how do you deploy that? And how do you deploy your fixes and your product updates to an environment that you can't trust?
I couldn't agree with you more. So we're in the stump the chump era. That's what we call it internally, right? When you get on a sales calls and this guy's like, well, what if I wanted to see this filter by X, by Y? It's why we sort of built Saleo the way we did, to be at that API in the pure data level versus like what we saw in the market that was basically an interactive screenshot or an overlay. Because every demo I've ever been on, and maybe this just comes from me being a technical software and similar with you, like people say, well, what if I wanted to see X by Y? What if I had 10 billion records? What if I wanted to filter this by people that were known threat actors over the last 24 hours? If you're not prepared for those questions, you're not prepared, right? Because the worst answer you can give somebody is, hey, I don't have anything to show for that, which immediately makes them think that you don't have a use case that fits them, right? And then you have to do a lot of recovery there. Or I'd say even worse is, this is a fake demo environment. We hear that from companies coming to us from some of our competitors all the time. It's incredibly scary to not demo your real product and have access to the features and the functionality of your real product.
I would say on the flip side of that, it's totally okay to say no. And I don't know as an SE, right? That's like a powerful way to get through the conversation. You can say, I don't know what would happen if you put a billion records through here. Let's move you to a POC. And that's where you start to use the other tools you have in your toolbox, like POCs, POVs. But it does have the risk of extending your sales cycle. It does have the risk of all of those things that come with it, right?
Yeah, the integration rates, it's very interesting, right? We see this idea of, demo automation, even companies like our own and everybody else in the market, right? One of the things you see on everybody's homepage is like, hey, we'll reduce the number of POVs and POCs that you see out in the market. But in a lot of ways, the market buyers are getting more savvy. They're increasing the numbers of POVs and POCs they want to do, right?
That was going to be a question I asked you is like, you see a lot of buyers and you have access to this industry. So if that's one piece of it, the increase in POCs or the increase of I'm going to try this thing in my own environment, like what else are you seeing in that trend on buyers changing and buyers' habits?
Yeah, so I had this talk with a CRO, like, I don't know, 3 weeks ago, which was really interesting that they say, we're going to measure the effectiveness of our demos on the amount of requests we get from POCs. Because you guys, like Saleo says, we say like, hey, we typically see less. And I go, that's interesting, but I wouldn't take that as gospel. Because if you see an increase, it might mean more people want their hands on their products.
Yeah,
right?
exactly.
It's equally valuable. So it's awesome, but like it really depends on the software, right? And so a lot of times you can avoid it with a really great personalized demo because people see themselves in your shoes. But some people like myself will get real excited about that. If I see myself in your shoes and I see the way your product sells, I immediately want my hands on the product. I'm like, let me do this because now I can make a value case to the CEO, to the other recs and say, this is what our data looks like in this platform. I can tell the same story. Like if you've done a great job telling me a story, I'm gonna take that same story and tell it to the rest of the leadership because that's how you get that buy-in authority. There are certain industries where it's just like, I just need to see my data and you see a huge POC drop them, but they can be innately valuable. You just got to be very smart about what limits your times and resources at companies supporting and building those.
That's another point too. And, you have access to people who are getting budget for tools. And it's a conversation we have a lot on the leadership side of PreSales Collective, which is, okay, you want to solve a problem and it might take a tool, it might take a new team member, it might take a reduction of a team, who knows, right? But I think a lot of pre-sales leaders are looking for advice on how to go to their CRO and say, this is worth it. And they're tracking the KPIs of their solutions teams. Maybe they're at a point where they already know what their influence and revenue is. They already know how many activations they have, like how many close one ops, those kinds of things. What advice do you have for leaders who are looking to earn a seat at that table to get budget?
Absolutely. And I'll give you another hot take. What I'm seeing is that this is pre-sales first time buying software, which is so interesting, right? The people in charge of getting people to buy software, it's their first time buying software. Until some of the breakthroughs in the last 4 or 5 years with tools like Saleo or other ones tertiary, right, to the pre-sales market, there weren't tools to make pre-sales better, right? Like their tool was Loom or something that like a sales team already purchased. And so it's really interesting. It's a conversation that we have frequently with people. Like we had to sort of learn it over time, right? Where a pre-sales person's like, this is amazing, I'm going to get budget tomorrow. And then like, oh, budget's hard to get at a company. And there's no budget.
Yeah.
Did you guys know there's no budget for pre-sales? And we're like, we're sort of learning that. Like people are wrapping it under sales or they're wrapping it under marketing or they're merging budgets from sales and IT and marketing all in one to like solve a problem. And so, the advice that I give pre-sales teams, and we don't deal with as many looking for funds anymore just because the market has sort of accepted that like, we got to dump some money into pre-sales and it should come from sales, but it's always, you've got to make a business case first, right? It's, if I do this, I will have X impact in the business. So if I'm buying Saleo and we never have to maintain our demo environment again, like we build ROI calculators. Like to me, ROI calculators are sort of the king. As long as you're not like, I always, talking about the office again, I always call it the Clevin, right? You see it in demo environments, you're doing everything, right? Like I'm just going to add a number and now it's our value, right? Like I did a proof of value with a company a couple of weeks ago that sent me an ROI calculator that told me it was cheaper not to buy their software. And I was like, hey, what's up?
Well, that's
like, oh yeah, like they didn't like it. They didn't realize, right? That they like, when they sent this over that like this thing, they were just like, hey, why don't you just like elevate this number and this number and this number? And like, so that's not the answer, right? It was super interesting, but like a well-built ROI calculator shouldn't have that pitfall.
Right.
At the end of the day, it's here's the cost of this. And so, at Saleo for us, it's how many hours a week do you spend grooming a demo environment? What if you didn't have to do anything about that? How much time was your engineering team spending? How much time, we did the same thing, whether I was at Terminus with how are you building your custom ad campaigns? How much time are you managing? What are you spending? What if you had a 1% increase in your cost per click to Sev1 being like, hey, how long does it take you to react to a network threat? And, what is this to like all of those calculators? Like time is money. And that's a huge one to people, but that doesn't always resonate in today's like tight pocketbook areas where they're like, oh, if I did this, I'd save more because people still see that money going out. So it's like the save more, sell more is sort of the ideal approach of if you want a salesperson, you want a CRO's budget, you tell them you're going to sell more. You can find a calculator that shows how you're breaking even month 2, month 3. I always say, like, how do we make this a guarantee? Well, Justin, my co-founder, he's an incredible sales guy. He always says, like, how do we make this a guaranteed home run for you? Like, what are the metrics? What are the things that put success in your lap that like get us there? And we work towards that goal, right? It's like, hey, 3 months in, if you're here, you agree that we would have saved you X. Yes, cool. And then when we get there, we make sure to like pop champagne for it. And we tell their CROs and we say, you have gotten, your ROI is here. You're on month 3. You got 9 more months of this contract to go before renewal. Like this is that bottle swap moment. And so I think that's the way you get budget. You got to impact people where it helps them. So if it's a CRO, it's make sure that they make more sales. If it's somebody in IT, hey, what if I could free multiple of your engineers to like not work on your demo environment? What if I could do, everybody has something that's important to them. And so you got to work the team.
And there's always the risk of just lost opportunity, right? So there's always the risk of when you wake up, the demo environment doesn't work.
Yeah.
Oh, I got to move my demo because this morning we've been busy fixing our demo environment. I've got to shift this from 9 a.m. to, it doesn't look like I have a slot till next week. All of a sudden you've bumped an opportunity. You've punted it a week because of a simple challenge. It's hard to calculate any of that though. We all know that happens at pre-sales. I've woken up and gone into my computer and go, oh, looks like the demo environment's down again. But it's hard to calculate. Maybe that's just better done with stories on top of data.
Yeah. I mean, there's a risk matrix to it for sure. One of the common pitfalls I see a lot of product teams are, and it's very common and blows my mind because it's not something I would ever do. And like trying to figure out how did we get here is an interesting conversation. But like a lot of pre-sales teams, to your point, like their environment's down because they have all the feature flags first. Every new feature gets dumped on the SEs and they're almost like the beta, right? Maybe like late beta participants. And I'm like, hey, you are an enterprise company doing multi-billions in revenue. This is not something to do to yours, or it's just an odd behavior to purposely interrupt the selling motion. It's just like, you build it in one environment, let them see that. If they want to demo feature that, you can migrate it over it as it's ready. But like SEs are expected to be like ready for that new hotness. But like a lot of companies introduce risk into their own sales cycle. The benefit is negligible at best.
Oh, all the time. Or, I've seen recently like companies will even internally keep things under wraps because they don't want the word to get out. And then all of a sudden the big change comes out and your whole, front office, go to market, whatever term you use, they're not enabled on it. Yep. And then it drops on the demo environment and let's hope it works, Yeah,
I see it very frequently. Sales tech space is notorious for this. Marketing tech space, using that term, the Clevin again, right? The random number is that companies will roll out new fields, new features, and it will be I don't want to call them nonsense numbers, but this is another Dan hot take. I'll call it a nonsense number, right? Engagement score. So what does that mean, right? Okay, cool. Like it's a score of 1 to 100. Like every sales tech tool on the platform has engagement score, and you ask each one how they measure it. Almost every pre-sales person will go white in the face, and you'll be like, hey, what's the hidden algorithm behind this? Well, it's a combination of positive deal activity over the last 60 days where a user had more than one intent signal on buying because of blah, 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 right? You imagine like a Saleo, this is another one of those like, hey, the building the demo environment from the ground up lets you know, like, hey, if I want to increase this engagement score, I build these activities, you start learning that. But like, it's just another number on your table, but it means so much. And companies are left and right rolling out these scores, right? Whether it's intent or engagement or, you see 1,001 different terms for them. And if your SEs don't know what they mean, they'll just be like, oh, it's how engaged they are with your account. Well, what does that truly mean, right? That doesn't tell you anything to the buyer. It's, hey, we're measuring X, Y, and Z, and this is why it benefits you. For me, it was a much better story, but they don't know it, right? It's just, to them, it's another field on a table.
There's a way to shortcut this. So let's say you're in the situation now, your environment's massive, your product is huge, releases are coming your way every day. You've got 7 to 8 demos on your calendar every day. You can't keep up with it. If that question comes your way and you don't know, because maybe you've never had the opportunity, or maybe you don't even have access to break apart the whole environment. Maybe this environment's just built and you're like, look, that's what I say when I get to that part of my demo. Besides like taking the next step of tearing that down and learning it better, what's the best way to answer that question?
So I think it comes to like product support team alignment. If I was starting a job as a new SE and I wanted to be the best SE at the company, I would make sure that I understood any unique metrics that are part of the product. Your typical knowledge base article or further, like, it ties into some of the stuff we're planning on talking about in a little bit, but like it's this rise of AI where like your customers can ask any question about their data at any point as you throw more and more layers on. And so I have a general belief that like a customer is going to expect the same out of you that they expect out of the AI, which means a prompt accurate answer, right? And so, if the two don't match, you've got an issue, right? It's who's telling me the truth. Is your AI bot telling me the truth? Is the SE telling me the truth? Do they just not understand how the product works? That's a lot of what I'm seeing.
And so the buyer expectations changed. Let's get into some tooling because you've embedded features like this. So, AI is the topic. I recently actually went through a whole virtual event with some really incredible leaders, and they said, hey, we didn't use the word AI once. It's a win, because I think people are so tired of hearing about it. But you've built this stuff, and I would love your experience in embedding things like chatbots, traffic monitoring. To take myself and my story back a bit, I did work at a security organization. We had basically a couple of USBs that had like big red tape on them because they had viruses on them, and we would throw them into an environment that was sandboxed. We would record that video and do a live demonstration, and we use that as a sales tactic. That is definitely not scalable. It's super risky. We were doing that like at the office, but we wanted to show that true traffic and that monitoring. Yeah. What's your experience integrating this? Like, how does it work?
It's fascinating. For Saleo, we're building a solution that works for any solution, which is like the typical bullshit founder sentence. But the fact of the matter is true. Like, you have to be able to generate data and help companies generate at scale. So just like we're talking about that sales law answer, like it's fine to be able to ask somebody to manually build one call. But if you want to build a graph, right, we have easier tools to do this than just forcing you to create the raw data too. Like, you could just draw a graph in Saleo. But let's say you have a table of email responses from an account. You can basically build it and say, like, I need you to generate 1,000 emails between account A that's in this column and account B at this column. And then here's their job titles. Like, you can sort of precede it and say, using this column D, which is average response, like, are they happy about this email? Are they sad? Whatever. And using the timing, like, generate these emails for me at scale. And so we've had a lot of experience sort of putting AI into that data at scale. And it's been really incredible matching data, because at the end of the day, all SaaS tools, everything comes back to a table of data. Like, a lot of people don't sort of realize that, but if you're looking at whether it's a graph, even if it's a completely unique graph to your company, it doesn't exist anywhere else in the world, to, and I'll tell this story in a second, but like a table of moving cars or live website traffic, everything at the end of that day, like, you see a big graph and, map, and it's got cars actively moving on it. All data for every computer in the world is stored structured, meaning it is a table at the end of the day. And so that's like the beauty of Saleo, is why we came up with the idea, is like, hey, let's go back to that data level and help people enrich back up to the product, because it's a way easier way of like dealing with complex data. All of our, most of our customers have incredibly complex data. We've even done one recently, just like we were talking about these moving cars, and I'll tell the story about live traffic too, or like live website traffic. But we had a prospect that, without getting into too many details, they track cars, some more sensitive data, but they need to be able to showcase this, because previously they were showing a map and saying, like, imagine this. And so we actually powered these cars to drive up and down this road over time. And so one of the demos that I rebuilt of these cars moving down was like the infamous route of like the OJ police chase, just to show that we could do it. Because I thought it was like super interesting. So like a historical where a car would have moved and gone over time. And so, and then we built that at scale. That I built like 10,000 more of those using AI really quickly, dropped them all in. And all of a sudden you've got cars driving up and down maps, just with a couple prompts that say, like, hey, increment its latitude and longitude every 3 seconds by 0.00003. I hacked it a little bit because, if you know the US and you know the way that we lay out highways, right? You have the even numbers going north, the odd numbers going east to west, right? And so like you could sort of pre-place them and know the direction that those cars could be going, depending on like the overall number. It was like some fun little hacks. But we did very similarly for a big rev tech company, which had live traffic monitoring. And this was super interesting. This is another way of like the SE is getting better at their jobs by understanding the depth of data. So previously they've been demoing the screen purely as, hey, here's a live view of the traffic currently on your website. So I see PreSales collectives on your website. They're reading your page about solutions engineers. That's the story that we told our buyers. Well, when we mapped the data back, right now that, Saleo goes back down to that database level and we work our way back up, we gave them a table and they were like, oh, cool. Like we can fill in a list of companies and then like the website page they're on. And then we have built this technology to like sort of refresh the page every 15 seconds, just like their normal product does, and show that these companies are now on a new page, or some have dropped off and some are going on. And so what we built was like this, here's where they went next. And they were like, what do you mean where they went next? I'm like, well, when the page refreshes, like you don't still want to show them on that current page. I mean, sometimes you do, because you want them to be on that page for a minute or 2 minutes at a time and then moving to something else. But like your software, when you're looking at this live dashboard, it's not just here's the pages they're currently on. It's here's their traffic history, right? Here's everything they read on your website and here's where they're going next. And shit, that changes the way we talk about it. They're like, yeah, like we hadn't really thought about this, but we only ever demo this page for 20 seconds at a time. We never had the live data. We're not waiting for the refresh. Even when we're waiting for the refresh, we didn't really connect in our brains that like PreSales Collective was on this page and now it's on this page, right?
Yeah,
So,
and it changes the story too. Leveraging these tools has enabled you to like tell stories and build data that looks appropriate to that story, right?
exactly.
It is a story. It's like your focus is on your buyer's experience, not making band-aids and patches in your demo and making it relevant.
Yeah, it's the true value of the product. I say, I hope somewhere a product leader like myself is shedding a tear when he sees the final demos coming out in a good way, right? Because it's like, finally, somebody understood what we were building here, because it's so hard to get there. And then like, you're setting the tone. So that person's, if they buy your software after that demo, their tone is, I should just check that page for 15 seconds. By the time they get through customer success, if they haven't been retrained on that feature, or they don't know because they don't have good data, or like a lot of times customer success doesn't have access to an environment that's any better than solutions engineering, to sales, to everything. Now you've got a customer in your raw product starting from scratch where data is iterating in over time because you can't collect it before you are a customer. And now it is. So now it's going to take 120 days for them to even have usable data that they can report back historically on to see the value of that traffic history. And it's like, man, that's a long distance between when you demo them and there. But if their mindset was, hey, well, the first time I ever saw this, they told me this is the story, it's way different than, hey, I got to change this habit, or hey, this page isn't that important because I'm just checking to see who's live right now and I'm going to call down.
I think to summarize and to land this plane, you're a really passionate product builder. You've really designed, I think, incredible solutions. You get the problem very well. So what I'm kind of hearing is like, own the data, own the demo environment. So technical SEs win. And I think this conversation is not very prevalent because we focus on soft skills a lot. Most organizations, I think, are in charge of their technical enablement, and where they don't have budget or where they don't see, I wouldn't say value. There's tons of value in soft skills. Obviously, that's like the craft of solutions. But maybe even on the product side, they're not doing a good enough job of enabling their SEs to understand at a deep level how it works. Do you have any advice on those product and solutions relationships? Because a lot of the time there's this sort of butting of the heads that happens where I'm here in the market, I understand my customers, they're asking me for these 3 features, but when I go to my product team, they don't think those 3 features are the most important thing because they've got some pet project that is, maybe this is a hot take, is like they've got some pet project that they want to build and they think is really cool, but it doesn't actually help me sell anything. It's not what my buyers aren't really wanting. It's technically interesting, but the market doesn't care. They want this other thing.
Yeah, I always say, like, I joke with my team. I said, like, especially with some of the feature requests we get, I'm like, I'm definitely not building for my ego, right? You're not always building the next thing you think is cool, right? I think it's important for product teams to set a tone and to release things that they think people will want, right? Because it changed the market. Like, we have some cool features coming out that, like, we've heard these pains. This is the solution for it. Is it the perfect fix for those? No, because we think it changes the way you demo, right? And so when you demo this way, like, your life is going to be so much better that, like, that's not a problem. This isn't a problem. That being said, like, with a relationship between SEs, like, as product, you need to be listening with an ear to the market constantly. And those are the people that hear it, right? Like, the questions you're going to get in pre-sales are going to be amplified when they're customers. And the issues they might point out early on are going to be amplified when they're customers. And I would argue that it's more prescient and smarter to solve those pain points right? That's why there's solutions engineer, right? Solution stands for figuring out that solution, right? It's bringing that to product and pre-planning versus, hey, we signed this customer, they're 6 months in, we knew they were going to have an issue with X, Y, and Z, and now we're trying to save them on the back half of a renewal. And so,
and that's the thing too, it catches up with you, right? And this is the great nuance of being in solutions and pre-sales is we can have this conversation about product and it's just as relevant. And we can have this conversation about sales and it's just as relevant. And we can have the conversation about marketing and it's just as relevant. And you have to be the Swiss Army knife that says, I understand where the market's going. I know where the pain points are and where they will be in the future. But you also have to have the ability to build those internal relationships to where when you speak, they listen.
Exactly. Right. And they understand why you're saying those things, right? Like, it's a process that I'm even continually improving on, but it's this, hey, I'm releasing this because of why. So typically what I do, so we just released our 369th version of Saleo to the store last night. So, like, we iterate very fast. We're feature heavy. We'll let people know at the end of the month, like, all the things that come, but we do release notes with almost every couple releases. And one of the things we do is I don't just say, hey, X and Y feature is out. If a customer requested or it's tracked on their pain point, like we say, hey, I did this feature for this customer because Y, right? And then we make sure that that keeps back to the customer, because that's where, if you're not building for them, you're building for yourself, right? And like, I'm not interested in like building for my ego. Like, it's not what Dan thinks the best demo tool is, right? It should be what the market is. Otherwise, I've seen it stop companies from growing, right? It's cool. You built this, you're going to get to like $1 million because there's maybe there's $1 million worth of other people that think like Dan in the market, right? Where there's probably 1 billion people that think like X, Y, and Z. And so, I had to learn that lesson early on with like data complexity and ease of use. Like I said, not everybody sees software the way I do. Like I feel like I look at it and sort of see the matrix and know what goes into it. But a typical end user, when they want to build the data, like how do we structure Saleo to be super simple? We went through a whole usability exercise with a guy that typically you hire UI guys that worked on a Salesforce or a Drift or a SalesLoft that are like the big companies. And I was like, no, I'm going to go hire somebody that worked on mobile apps. And they're like, why? And I said, mobile apps are simplistic. You can't stuff a ton of data in. We hired a guy that previously built Uber's app and Adobe's app. And he was like, this is how you optimize this space. This is what's important. Let's hyper-focus on bringing the features that are powerful to the forefront and like letting things fade out. And it's probably one of the most valuable things we've done as a company, because we went from being a technical solution to user-friendly.
Yeah, to being something that people can consume. Let's go ahead and head over to the lightning round. I have some interesting questions for you, more on a personal level, because we do want to get to know who you are, Dan. And I want to invite the audience and the PreSales Collective to follow you and engage with you over whatever channels you have. So this is just a few questions, quick answers, and then we will wrap it up with ways to get a hold of you. First question, you can have a hot take here too, but what are some of your biggest pet peeves in solution engineering demos?
Imagine if 100% every day. I don't want to imagine. I want to see your software. I think you're hiding something. As a product leader, I know it's not that hard to get data in there. So that, and I'll say poor lack of data, right? So imagine if data, super poor. And also, hey, only have 2 records for this, and this is what I'm showing. It immediately thinks that there's an issue with scalability, immediately makes me think that you don't have customers like myself.
So poor lack of data. And really, I think you would be like a technical buyer's, I would say nightmare is the right word for you, Dan, because you're not. You're a really nice guy.
I do ask a lot of questions.
You would be the guy who's like, no, how does everything work? And, and I think we all need to prepare for that. What drives you personally more than money?
I love building things cool, innovation, and building. And it doesn't have to be necessarily like products. I love building software, and I still build stuff on my free time and just throw things out to the market, open source or whatever. They want to go play with things. Getting to understand how things work. I have 1,001 hobbies. I've rebuilt a pinball machine from the ground up, never knowing soldering before, just buying one at the yard sale, wanting to know how do I rebuild this and rehook it up. I built a mini bike during COVID from scratch, just bought an engine. I said, I don't know how engines work. Like I was the guy that always took a car in for an oil change. And I was like, I'm working on improving my manliness here a little bit. Like I'm going to go and build something with an engine from the ground up. And then I did a golf cart, and then I did an electric golf cart, and then another one. And it was like, if you're not building, like your mind's got to be thinking, right? I built an arcade machine in our basement. I recently built like a giant e-bike that can do like 70 miles an hour, piece by piece by piece. I call it adult Legos, but I love how it works and how it's made. And like, I'll sit there watching those shows and I'll be like, I could make that better by doing X and Y. And it's totally wrong. My wife was an engineer major for a little bit. She's actually an accountant. My father-in-law's an engineer. My brother-in-law's an engineer. Like I'll postulate on like how I make things better. And I'm like, you're a moron. In the nicest way, right? But like to me, I'm fascinated by how things go together. I just think it's so interesting.
That's cool. My son just got back into BattleBots. BattleBots, and I was like, okay, these are people who make things. People who actually,
like Mark Rovers and
these people make stuff.
That's a dream. If I ever had like $1 billion, like I sold Saleo and life was great, like I'd build a robot that can murder another robot today. Like this is the thing. It's a jetpack tomorrow.
That's exactly what the founder of my last company did at Datto.
Oh, really?
He has a warehouse where he said you could build an iPhone in it if you wanted to. It's like totally built up.
I always tell my wife, I said, I have no interest in double staircases and marble floors. Give me a giant garage full of tools and like a million and one things to put back together. And I'll repair people's electronics all day. Just bring me your clock radio and let me put it back together. Like it's fun for me.
What's your favorite movie?
So there's a movie called Millions, which is directed by Danny Boyle, huge director, and nobody ever knows it. It's one of my favorite books too by Frank Cottrell Boyce. It's a story of 2 kids really young, right after their mother died, who find $1 million pounds, like it comes off of a train, like a bag of money falls off a train. And it's in like the weeks before they're switching to the euro and they have to spend it or change it. And it's like both of their decisions where one is hyper focused on trying to do like good with the money and figure out like a way that he can like change the world with it in this very short amount of time. And like Paul struggled with like the death of his mother, while the other one just wants like fancy, cool stuff. And I just connect incredibly with the company because I like both of those things. I love helping people, but like cool stuff is fun too. And yeah, highly recommend people watch it. It came out like in between 28 Days Later and Slumdog Millionaire. And it just sort of is like the lost Danny Boyle movie, but it's super interesting to me.
I'm a total movie nerd. I've never seen this movie, but this happens. There are times where just these absolute gems drop at the wrong time and they don't get the ride that they deserve. So I'll check it out.
Great Christmas movie. It's set around Christmas. So.
Right. What's something that most people don't know about you? You shared a lot already beyond like building a mini bike yourself and like going to Apple as a 20-year-old and everything else you've unpacked.
Yeah. So to me, like, this is like, I'm a man of 1,000 stories. I always say like I've Forrest Gumped my way through life. But back in the day, like I've done a lot of like fantastical things, but I used to be hyper obsessed with video games. One of the first things I wanted to know how they worked was how do video games work? And I was obsessed with like the levels and the things you would play even over the coding. And so I got heavy into environmental design, like actually building levels of games. I was modding games like Unreal Tournament, like the original one that came in, not even 2003. And that got me a job at a company called Artificial Studios when I was still in like 8th, 9th grade building levels for them. And Artificial Studios, fun fact, ended up selling to Epic Games, the maker of Fortnite, when I was in 9th grade. And I was like 14, 15. And I was like, well, the one person that didn't migrate over with some of the acquisition. I think there was a couple other people that didn't because they were remote or they were like overseas. Like it had been a hobby project for us. We were building a video game called Helix Core and building this incredible graphics engine on top of it. You can still find some of our demo videos on YouTube. And Epic Games swung in. And now like a lot of that technology got pulled into Unreal Engine like 3 and 4 and to Fortnite now. And so my kids are playing video games. I'm like, see that HDR blue shift that happened when you went from dark area to light area and it whited out? I was involved with that. I wasn't the guy that coded it.
That's
I
cool.
built a level 4 game for the guy that coded it, sort of tertiary, it's super nerdy for me, but I got like very involved with those guys. I got to beta test games for John Romero, who was previously designed the games Doom and Quake, right? Like it's like I have a knack for meeting my heroes. And so that's always some of the side stories I tell people. Like somehow Dan found a way.
Yeah.
Running joke.
Somehow you Forrest Gumped your way. I haven't heard that term too much, but it does sound like you've had a lot of epic journeys.
Yeah. I always just say, put yourself where you want to be and things sort of work out, right? Like I didn't want that company to sell Epic Games. That wasn't my plan. Like I was just having fun building game levels. And I just emailed a bunch of people like, I sort of didn't know my limitations as like an 8th grader, 9th grader. I was just like, oh, I'm really good at building levels. And I'm like winning these level design contests left and right online. And people are like paying attention to my work. I should just email games. Like, I don't want to scoop ice cream anymore. So I just like offer to build a video game level for a company. And I did. I at one point I built an entire level for like $75. I thought I made out. I'm like thinking back on it now. I'm like, oh my God, this company probably would have paid me 40 grand for this like giant thing. But hey, it happens.
What's the best way to get a hold of you?
Email, dan@saleo.io, easiest way. LinkedIn as well, but I think we're all under the glut of 1,001 LinkedIn connections sending us emails every time we accept. So email is the best way.
Well, thank you so much for breaking this apart. I really appreciate you, Dan. I've learned a lot and hope to have you back as a guest soon.
Same to you, Chris. Thank you so much.
Wow. That was a wild ride with Dan and highlights the vast differences we work through in pre-sales with buyers and engineers' expectations. Dan is a technical and naturally curious person who wants to know the speeds and feeds behind everything on the dashboard. We all run into buyers just like that, and I think Dan highlighted the importance of knowing your product from the ground up very well. He also highlighted his work and his current venture, Saleo, and I hope him the very best. You can follow him on LinkedIn or connect with him at dan@saleo.com. At PreSales Collective, this is one of those examples where we learn, grow, and we connect together. I hope you can take some of this away into your current practices in your demo environments with your team. Until next time, take care.